Okay. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the briefing room here at the brand new Reform UK headquarters. It's a building we're proud of, and this will be the place from which we'll operate and from which we intend to win the next general election. If I said that a year ago, you all would have laughed. Well, people aren't laughing quite as much anymore. Welcome to week 2 of our crime figures campaign. Now, before I start, there's been some questioning of the crime figures that we've been talking about, in particular by Fraser Nelson, who's not in the room. Fraser seems to think that crime is going down and that all is well with the world and there's absolutely nothing to worry about at all. Well, he's relying on the crime survey for England and Wales. This excludes crimes such as shoplifting. It excludes what they call victimless crimes, such as drug possession, and even the possession of weapons. It also has no weighting whatsoever for high crime areas, and really rather depends on whether people want to fill out the survey or not. And when it comes to shoplifting, when it's complete nonsense, obviously. Just one example, the House of Lords Justice and Home Affairs Committee estimated that the true extent of shoplifting last year was 17 million incidents. So the CSEW, as far as we're concerned, is pretty much discredited as a means of measuring crime. And I think we all know that crime has risen significantly over the course of the last few years. And most of us now just don't even bother to report crime. Firstly, because we don't think the police will do anything about it. And secondly, because if we have our mobile phone stolen and we report it and claim on the insurance, the premium will double or treble. And that goes for much household crime as well. Over the course of the last week, migrant crime has been a very, very big debate around the country following the episode that took place at the Bell Hotel in Epping. And over the course of the next few weeks, we will delve more deeply into this. There is an alarming parallel between the extraordinary increase in the number of reported rapes and the wholly irresponsible immigration and asylum policies pursued by first Labour and then by Conservative governments. And even to have said that a couple of years ago would have been difficult without being shouted down. And I'd felt that we'd finally come to a place where we could honestly talk about crime, where we could honestly talk about the fact we want the right types of people from different countries coming into Britain, not the wrong types of people. We were even able last week to mention the fact that Afghan men are 22 times more likely to be convicted of rape than British-born nationals. And in the Sun national newspaper this morning, you'll see the figure they report there, that for sexual assaults in London, over the course of the last 7 years, 40% of them have been committed by non-British nationals. So I'd felt that things were genuinely opening up for a proper, rational, sane debate without being shouted down. Until the Online Safety Act came into being this weekend, which begins to look, although state suppression of genuine free speech may be upon us already. And I'm going to ask Zia Yousuf, who has studied this in detail, to give us a brief. Zia.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Look, Britain is descending rapidly into some kind of dystopia. This Online Safety Act, Orwellianly named, what it does absolutely nothing to protect children. What it does do is suppress freedom of speech in this country and really force social media companies to censor anti-government speech. I want to make a few points about this act. It's about a couple of hundred pages long, so one questions how many people actually read it, including the Tory MPs who voted and waved it through unanimously. The first section I want to draw your attention to is section 44, which gives the Secretary of State the ability to force Ofcom unilaterally to rewrite the rules about what speech social media platforms must censor. And that is a pretty terrifying thing for a single individual to have. In fact, it's the sort of thing that I think Xi Jinping himself would blush at the concept of. Then there's section 179, which is maybe even more insidious, which is to say it is illegal to say something which you know to be false, which causes, quote, and I quote, non-trivial psychological harm. And it's actually much worse than making that speech illegal. It forces social media companies to proactively censor that speech. The third point I want to make is look at the penalties that are being imposed on the social media companies who are subject to this act. You're talking about 10% of global revenues. And look, they know what they're doing in drafting this legislation. They are trying to create a perverse set of incentives so that if you're a management team, a chief executive, or a board trying to protect your shareholder value, and most of these companies are international, so the UK is a tiny sliver of their revenue, so what are they going to do? They're going to be overzealous on their censorship. And by the way, it's not just 10% of global revenues. It goes further than that. The management teams of these social media companies are being threatened with jail time. And look, Elon is a hero in terms of freedom of speech, but I think even the mighty Elon is going to struggle to get his management teams to put their freedom at stake when it comes to censorship. So we're already seeing the results of this. It's been about 48 hours now since this kicked in. We've seen a few things. Number one, VPN providers are publishing their stats of increases in sign-ups in the UK, up thousands of percent. Evidence, by the way, that the 13, 14, 15-year-olds know far more about how the internet works than the dinosaurs that drafted this legislation and voted it through. But it also shows, if you go onto X, you will have seen there was a protest in Leeds against illegal immigration and a migrant hotel in the local area that has been actively suppressed. There are many other examples being surfacing now. And again, this is X, which I would probably bet will be still the strongest in terms of maintaining free speech. But one can hardly blame these companies when this is what the legislation states. And then within that same 48-hour period, we've heard that the government, number 10, has created, and I quote, an elite police force in response to the migrant situation. Now, you might think that was because of the risk of so much anger around crimes being committed by illegal migrants, by people being deposited into communities from alien cultures with no say for local people, and looking to ensure that those illegal migrants do not commit crimes. Of course, you'd be wrong. It is the opposite. This elite police force has been set up in order to, quote, monitor anti-migrant sentiment. So I use the word dystopia advisedly. Inevitably, if you look through history, any student of history will know that the way countries slip into this sort of authoritarian regime is through legislation that cloaks tyranny inside the warm fuzz of safety and security, and hope nobody reads the small print. Well, we have read the small print. We at Reform we think this is the greatest assault on freedom of speech in our lifetimes, and I can announce today that as Prime Minister, Nigel Farage and a Reform government will repeal the Online Safety Act. Yes, we agree children need to be protected. This does not protect children. I want to stress this. I actually think people who actually understand tech, and I want to stress the people who drafted this and voted it through do not understand it, can understand that sending all of these kids onto VPNs is a far worse situation and sends them much closer to the dark web where real dangers lie. So it actually makes children less safe on the internet, while, of course, and perhaps this was the intention all along, makes freedom of speech for British people under mortal threat. And the final thing I want to say is we should not forget who birthed this bill, which is now an act, who voted and nodded it through without any opposition, other than in some cases, like Mr. Philp, arguing it didn't go far enough. So the people who did this were the Tories, including, by the way, the ones who now present themselves as against all of these horrors, people like Suella Braverman, people like Robert Jenrick, who in my view represent the most insidious form of politician, people who tell us all of the things we want to hear, but when they had power in their hands and could do something about it, they sold us out when it counts. So Reform believes in freedom of speech. I don't think there is a political figure in our lifetimes who has a longer track record of decades, other than Nigel, who has spoken out about this, and we will repeal this act as one of the first things a Reform government does. Thank you very much.
Zia, thank you very much. And I think so far, okay, it may only have been a couple of days, but thus far there has been far too little debate in mainstream media about this issue. Clearly, what is happening, and happened very, very quickly. Millions of people have noticed that what they're getting on their feeds is different to what it was just this time last week. Well, we're now going to move on, not to talk about elite police units that crack down on comments on the internet. Now, we're now going to talk about real policing and about a real policeman, somebody with a very, very distinguished career. Before I introduce Colin Sutton to you, here's a short video just to remind people of his history and his background.
Crime is going unchecked all over the place, all over the country. I'm Colin Sutton. I was a police officer for 30 years. I was fortunate enough to lead a marvellous team when we were investigating some of the nastiest and most publicised murders, I suppose, of the first part of this century. We convicted the serial killer Levi Belfield, the serial rapist and night stalker Delroy Grant. I get known as a detective. I'd rather be known as a leader. My number one thing really was to look after the team. Leaders now tend to think an awful lot about themselves and their own careers rather than their team and the community. And I think we need to go back to that if we're going to have policing succeed and policing to return to something that is accepted and welcomed by the community. Two-tier policing, two-tier criminal justice system is one that's been bandied about a lot. I don't think it's an unfair thing to say. I think the perceptions are real. You've only got to look through the news, through social media, at the disparity between sentences for different crimes or for people from different communities or from different ideologies. And I start asking myself and say, well, how can it be? How do we end up in this situation where these disparities are there, but they're real? First reason for that is just simply numbers. Officers in London, particularly, are going from blue light call to blue light call to blue light call, and they haven't got time to speak to people. They haven't got time to find out about their community. There's too much work to do, that things are not happening in the criminal justice system quickly enough, decisively enough. 14 years of the Tories caused it. It happened on their watch. We made a difference when I was in the police service. There's no doubt about that. And I thought, well, maybe I've got an opportunity now to make a difference with another team. And so that team, I think, is Reform. I believe in it. The greatest asset Reform has in some ways is our leader, because he is a communicator. We need to be able to replicate that locally so people will follow us. It's about teamwork and it's about one voice taking other people with us. I think the best chance of making sure we turn this round and we make this change is if we have a Reform UK government. Britain is lawless. Britain needs reform.
So Colin Sutton is about to embark on his second big career, and I'm very pleased to say he's also announced that he intends not just to stand for us at the next general election, but to head up a law and order and policing task force so that we can go into the next general election ready on day one to start doing the right things, to reverse lawlessness and take back control of the streets. So we really are, as a party, absolutely delighted to welcome Colin Sutton on board. Colin. Welcome.
Well, I'm so glad to be here. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming, I suppose. Just have to say, an elite team looking at tweets would not be my experience of the police service, but we'll gloss over that one for the moment, I think. You might be asking why I'm here, why Reform, why now, why do this, why not get my handicap below 11? I don't know. I do know, actually. It's because for 14 years we saw the Conservatives wreck our country and wreck, for me, the most important institution in that country, which is our police service. The police service is part of what I see as the three pillars of a decent life. You need to be healthy, you need to have an income, and you need to be secure in your home and on the streets as you're living that life. And if we fail on any one of those three, then people cannot think things are getting better. The decline in public service is just amazing. So many people last July said, well, it can't get any worse. Actually, privately, I think it could. I thought it could. but many thought it couldn't. Well, what's happened? It's not only got worse, I find every single day I'm thinking to myself, is Rishi Sunak still holding Keir Starmer's beer? The obvious situation to address that, it started in 2010, it started with the decline with austerity, with the withdrawal of resources, which means now that our police services have sold the family silver entirely across the estate. And they're not going to get any more money or more resources from this government, are they? The only place where resources from this government will go into policing are the Chagos Islands. It's not going to happen. We can find savings. There are savings to be made. Do you know that police forces in this country spend anywhere between 10 and 70 million pounds a year on DEI initiatives? And what I want us to do is to ask the people out there who are people who are policed and who want these people to be working for them, whether or not they see that as the priority. Because if you need some help, if you need police officers, if you need help quickly, do you actually care who comes through the door? You want 2 trained, competent officers to solve your emergency there and then, and you're not going to ask them how they voted or what their heritage is. It doesn't make any difference. Reform have said that they want to increase the number of officers by 30,000 within the next Parliament. I will be pushing for them to add to that the commitment, or at least the ambition, to open at least 300 front counter police buildings. Because as far as I am concerned, we have lost too many. We've lost nearly 700 public access police buildings across this country since 2010. The Metropolitan Police in London is going soon to go down to having only 18 points of public access in the whole of London. When I was working, that was well over 100. And it's no good saying that internet access and online access is a replacement for it, for 2 reasons. One is that the aged, the infirm and the generally vulnerable may well find difficulties in using the internet or indeed getting access to it. But secondly, and what's more important, is it's a lot harder to turn somebody down if they're face to face with you pleading for help, than it is if you've got an email in a stack. We need to re-engage. We need to re-engage, we need to be more visible. Because at the moment we've got a response team that you can't guarantee turns up because there are too few of them, and those that are there are wasting their time driving long distances because there are no police stations anymore, and then even longer distances because there's no custody suites to take the prisoners to if they do arrest somebody, and then driving back in. You can lose 5 hours out of an 8-hour tour of duty just driving about to your patrol area, driving to a custody area and back. How is that productive? Investigations. All crimes that are reported used to be looked at. They weren't all investigated with vigour. You have to be realistic about this. There are too many of them. But every single one is looked at by somebody who's experienced, somebody knows what they're looking at, and they make a decision as to whether or not the investigation carries on. Nowadays, too many crimes are just given a reference number for the insurance company and forgotten about. That can't happen. In terms of public order, it's very difficult. You need to show that public order is being policed fairly, that it's being policed impartially. The recent judgment in the court about Avon and Somerset, about Northumbria, has helped us to that degree, I think, because it takes away the idea that police officers are going to get involved in any kind of public display of partiality to one cause or another. That's a good step forwards. But in terms of how we police public order, I, in this task force, want to get people who know. I did public order policing up until about 30 years ago, I suppose, for about the first 10 years of my career, and I know a bit about it, but I want people who know more about it. And they might be able to explain to us why it is that some bodies, some organisations, are perhaps more clever in the way that they mount their protests compared to others, and that's why you get the different levels of policing. I don't know. There may be reasons for it. We need to look at that. But if we're going to rebuild trust in the police service, we need to re-engage with the community. We need to re-engage with the real community, not with community leaders, so-called. How do you become a community leader? Who advertises it? Where's the job description? We need to do the things that matter to real people. I can't believe, I've known thousands of police officers over my life, past and present, and I can't believe that any one of those would tell me that he or she joined up, signed on the dotted line to serve king and country, or queen and country in the past, because they wanted to police social media. I used to go home as a young police officer to my family and say, brilliant job last night, mean streets of Tottenham, yes, we arrested a burglar. That's what you join for. Do these days go home and say, found a fantastic offensive tweet today? And I'm sure the answer to that is no. I'm sure that's not what they want to be doing. So then the question is, why is it that they're doing it, that they're doing what they're doing? And I'll tell you what it is, what I think it is. I think it is the fact that our leadership is caring more about itself and its own career than it is about their team, important to me, and the community, important to everybody. And so, they're, like most organisations, the police service is no different. It has been captured by a liberal ideology, and people are too scared of bucking against that ideology. And so when the decision comes up to make, do we go this way, do we go that way, or that way is going to give me a massive black mark because it doesn't fit in with the trend, I'm not going to get promoted, let's do that instead. Yeah, but the public won't like that. Doesn't matter. They're not the ones that promote me, are they? The dilemma that the officers often have is what is the least worst decision for me. It should be what is the best decision for the community. I think we need to refocus what police are doing onto homes and streets and not posts and tweets. That's the most important thing. That's the most important thing for the people out there who want their... But you ought to be able to walk out of here with a decent watch on. I left mine at home today. You ought to be able to go out there and call an Uber on your iPhone. But I wouldn't do it once I got out the door in London these days. There's a phone stolen every 60 seconds in London. How can that be right? How can that be right? How can we let that happen? So what I want to do is to get this task force together. I've had some people, already volunteer to me that they want to assist me. Good people, people who know things. Policy, prevention, processes. Police officers who are watching or listening to this will smile when I say the 3 Ps, because that means something else in policing. I won't go into that here. Okay, but policy, prevention and the processes is what we will look at, and we will come up with a plan that takes back control, makes Britain not the lawless place it's becoming. Thank you very much.